everybody. Welcome back to White Knowledge is Power, Understanding Racism in America and Why White People Should Know Black History. I have to tell you that today's video is something that is absolutely shocking, and I can't believe that this happened. It's absolutely insane. So apparently there was a young 28-year-old Black woman jogging at night out in the park in New York. And around 9 p.m., she was viciously attacked, brutally raped, and left to die. There were a lot of people in the park that night, but the police rounded up some suspects, and a handful of those suspects was a group of young white teenage boys, ages 14, 15, and 16, who were hanging around the park at the time. The police hauled them in and started interrogating them without their parents present and without any legal representation. They didn't follow protocol. They didn't give them food, water. They weren't able to sleep for over 24 hours. One of the boys even said that they heard the cops next door beating up his friend, and they would look at him and say, "You're next." So these children are alone, scared, hungry, tired, and the cops interrogated them so aggressively that 4 out of the 5 teens ended up confessing on camera, but their stories of the incident were all different. They went to trial, and despite the fact that their confessions were coerced, and despite the fact that all of their semen were tested against a sample taken from the victim, and it was shown that it was not a match to any of them, they were all sentenced to a maximum sentence for juvie they could receive, except for one of the kids. He was tried as an adult because he was 16 years old and given a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison. Can you believe that these poor white kids were arrested for just being in the park at the same time that this Black lady was attacked? They were held without legal counsel, held without their parents, had coerced confessions taped and used against them, and they were sentenced to juvie and prison. Where's the justice? If some of you are thinking that this sounds a little familiar, it's because this didn't just happen, and it didn't happen to a group of white teen boys allegedly attacking a Black woman. It happened to a group of teen Black boys allegedly attacking a white woman in 1989. The real case is known as the Central Park Five, or the Exonerated Five, as it's known now. 5 Black teen boys were arrested and sentenced for a crime that they didn't do. The boys were Corey Wise, age 16, Antron McCrae, age 15, Raymond Santana, age 14, Kevin Richardson, age 14, and Yusuf Salam, age 15. These boys were subjected to hours of psychological pressure and aggressive interrogation, ending in coerced videotaped confessions from 4 of them. They all recanted their statements. Beyond that, their confessions also all differed from each other regarding when, where, and who committed this assault. When their cases went to trial, it should be noted that the judge that was assigned to their case was assigned specifically, even though protocol dictated at the time that these judges were assigned by a random lottery. That's weird. These boys were convicted despite inconsistent and inaccurate confessions, DNA evidence that excluded them, and no eyewitness accounts connecting them to the victim. I also just want to take a moment to state that Corey Wise, the 16-year-old, got the short end of the stick in this case beyond all of them, okay? He was merely tagging along to the police precinct as moral support for one of the other boys. He literally had nothing to do with this case. He wasn't even in the park at the time. Unfortunately, the police ended up pulling him into the interrogations, and he ended up serving the most time, and he also was the only one tried as an adult. He was sent to Rikers Island at the age of 16, which is one of the most violent prisons in the United States. All of the boys except Santana appealed their court decisions, and they all lost. It wasn't until December 2002 that Justice Charles Tejada of the Supreme Court of New York granted a motion to vacate the convictions due to serial rapist Matias Reyes confessing to the crime and having DNA evidence back that confession up. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations for this case had already passed, so Reyes never actually got convicted or formally charged with the crimes, even though he did it. The Exonerated Five ended up finally settling a civil case against New York, police officers, and prosecutors for $41 million. Now, I have to take a moment and talk about the impact that the media had on this case. I personally believe that it was the use of the media that led to the conviction of these young boys. Even though it was against protocol, the press released the minors' names, addresses, and photos. This led to death threats and other aggressive actions being taken against the families of the five. These children were called, quote, bloodthirsty animals, savages, and human mutations, end quote, in the media. Another quote from the New York Post said, quote, from a world of crack, welfare, guns, knives, indifference, and ignorance, a land with no fathers, to smash, hurt, rob, stomp, rape, the enemies were rich, the enemies were white, end quote. A real estate mogul at the time ended up taking out huge full-page ads in the New York Times, New York Daily News, the New York Post, and the New York Newsday with the headline, quote, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police, end quote. When interviewed, the tycoon stated, quote, Mayor Cook has stated that hate and rancor should be removed from our hearts. I do not think so. I want to hate these muggers and murderers. They should be forced to suffer. Yes, Mayor Cook, I want to hate these murderers, and I always will. How can our great society tolerate the continued brutalization of its citizens by crazed misfits? Criminals must be told that their civil liberties end when an attack on our safety begins, end quote. He also wrote, I want to hate these murderers, and I always will. I'm not looking to psychoanalyze or understand them. I'm looking to punish them. In a CNN interview at the time, he said, quote, maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done, end quote. The same real estate mogul wrote an opinion article in 2014 after the settlement with the Exonerated Five for the New York Daily News and said that the settlement was a disgrace and that the men were likely guilty. He said, quote, settling doesn't mean innocence, end quote. That real estate mogul was none other than Donald Trump. If your viewpoint or care for this case changed after hearing that the races were switched, I think it's very important for you to ask yourself why. Why are some people more accepting and okay with a group of Black teens being arrested and incarcerated for something they didn't do, but go apeshit if it's a group of white teens? It's because of something we call systemic racism and white supremacy. The justice system is built to work against people of color, and we have been taught since the beginning of this nation that Black people's voices don't count as much as white people's voices. Now, whether you agree with that statement or not, doesn't take away the fact that it's true. With the bills that are being put forth and passed in this country, Black history and Black voices, as well as LGBTQIA and women's voices, are being erased. A whitewashed version of history does nobody any good. We cannot allow our society to eradicate the perspective and voice of those outside of the accepted norm of white cisgender Christian men. Racism exists, and it's a very tangible reality for many in this country. So we must continue to educate ourselves, spread the truth, and let's end racism together.